Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stand Up and Take Action with Stand Up California. I'm Karen, Executive Director for Stand Up California. We've got another amazing episode for you all today. It's our first episode of the year. Yay! My goal is to really get that sound effect of like clapping for everybody in the future. We've got a big announcement today that has potential for health rights in California. And our guest today is someone that I've looked up to personally since I got involved with health rights. So this is a fangirl moment for me today as well, that I get to sit down and interview our guest today. But first, before I introduce our guest, I want to remind you that if you're not already connected to your local Stand Up California chapter, to sign up today by going to standupcalifornia.com, where you instantly become connected to your community of advocates. Don't forget to head over to our YouTube channel where you can see our previous interviews as well. All right, let's get into it today. We have Christina Hildebrand, President and Founder of A Voice for Choice Advocacy. And for those of you that may not know this, Stand Up California is actually a project of A Voice for Choice Advocacy, which is very special because I don't think, to me personally, there's anybody that has the knowledge of the ins and outs of California policies, the legislation process, and the legality of what we deal with in health rights, other than our guest today. So without further ado, Christina, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing? It's good to be here.
I'm doing good. We got rain this morning, so it's
Yep.
a great, nice winter California day. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? We'll start there. How did you get into this? Where did your journey start? And of course, our staple question, what is your favorite ice cream?
So I got into this in 2015 because of SB277, which was the law that required personal belief, or no longer allowed personal belief exemptions in California school vaccine mandates, and left it with only a medical exemption. And I got into it that year thinking that, I was just going to be a citizen and I was going to go up and we were going to beat this bill and then I could go home and go back under my rock. And that didn't happen. And so I got active in California politics through that, and created a Voice for Choice Advocacy, as well as a Voice for Choice, which is our 501c4 and our 501c3. And then have been doing that ever since. And I was talking to somebody the other day, a journalist, the other day, and I said, if it weren't for SB277, I wouldn't be doing what I am. My life would be very different today, and I wouldn't have met all the amazing people that I have met. So that's kind of where I started from on this journey. And my favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip. So
Ooh, that's a good one. One of my favorites as well. This is why
yes.
we get along so well.
Yeah.
So good. So for those of you that don't know, a 501c3 and a 501c4, they're a little bit different. The process is a little bit different. And there are some things that you can do with the 501c3, some things that you can do with the 501c4. Christina, do you mind explaining to us what those differences are when it comes to advocacy?
Yeah, so a 501c3 is a tax deductible nonprofit. So that is what most, when you think of the word nonprofit, that's what most nonprofits are. And that they allow tax deductible donations. So if you make a donation to a 501c3, you do not pay taxes on it, and they don't pay taxes on the gift. The goal of a 501c3 is to educate. It truly is education and sharing of information. You can lobby and advocate with a 501c3, but it cannot take more than 20% of your time, money, and efforts, and all of those combined. And you run the risk, if you do advocate for more than that, you run the risk of losing your tax deductible donation status with the IRS. And so some organizations choose to have both, which is what we did, because we really want to spend more time and not worry about sort of, oh my goodness, are we coming up to that 20%, is there a chance we'll lose our nonprofit status? And so we actually created the 501c4 first, and then created the 501c3 afterwards. And with a 501c4, they are specifically for legislation, lobbying, advocacy. There are restrictions on both of them. For example, even with a 501c4, you cannot give money or promote a political candidate. So you can't do election stuff. To do that, you need a PAC. So we have not created a PAC. We have not gotten into that, although I personally do sort of a different project for the elections. But as an organization, a formal organization, we have not done any election work. So for the most part, when I sit here and talk to people, I sit here with my A Voice for Choice advocacy hat on, our 501c4, because that is where our, where the majority of the work that I do is. We do have a number of projects under A Voice for Choice, such as our Non-Toxic Schools project, which is purely educational.
Amazing. And I just want to congratulate you, not as part of Voice for Choice advocacy, but just in general. I got to see this year the great work that you guys do in Sacramento. You guys, Voice for Choice advocacy did have a sponsored bill, SB499, the Cool Schools Act. And just to see in committees and listening to the committees how it had bipartisan support, that's Democrats and Republicans, that's amazing. That's a huge milestone. I think that A Voice for Choice advocacy has really set a name for themselves as a professional and amazing organization that's not labeled on one side of the spectrum. Voice for Choice advocacy, the mission is it covers different topics, and I just want to congratulate you here on air again on the great work that A Voice for Choice advocacy does.
Thank you. And it is exciting. It was the second bill that we had authored. So the first bill was in 2020, where Assemblymember Christina Garcia put through a bill that labeled all menstrual product ingredients. And so as of this year in California, and actually throughout the US, menstrual products have ingredients labeled. And that was because of our organization. And this year we had SB 499, which Senator Menjivar authored. It didn't make it through the full process because of budget issues. But again, it was not on, it was on a different issue to mitigate extreme heat and air pollution in schools. And so that just shows, the diversity. I think, one of my favorite moments this year was in a policy committee, and I was speaking on SB 499, and one of the assembly members that is very pro-vaccine, and very much we have agreed to disagree on that topic. He looked over at me and he kind of winked and was just like, and I was just like, oh God, don't take it out on us, because we see differently on the vaccine issue. And he said he wanted to co-author the bill. And so to me, that was it really shows how far we've come and how much we're considered a professional organization, and an organization that, we don't need to see eye to eye on everything with legislatures, but we can have those relationships and have strong relationships with them.
Absolutely. And I'm thankful for that, because that's something that we can take and implement in Stand Up California. That's something that we talk a lot about, building rapport with your legislator, even if they are a Democrat. We do live in a trifecta state, so we need to make sure that we continue to have those relationships and, like you said, agree to disagree.
Yeah.
Our episode today will be centered around the California exemption laws that have been passed. The way I like to explain it is that California parents have been cornered when it comes to vaccination requirements to enroll their children in school. And this goes for public school as well as private school. Looking back when the COVID mandates started coming down, we had 10 bad bills in the 2022 legislature that created a big awakening of Californians that hadn't been part of health rights before. They didn't really know what had happened prior to 2022. However, getting to know a little bit more of what's happened in the past, they're eager to create change and how they can get involved. Christina, could you walk us through how did we get here? What happened, and what senator decided to do this to us?
Yes. So it's all Senator Pan's fault, although it started off when he was in the assembly. It started off in 2013 with AB 2109, and what's interesting is my children had a personal belief exemption at the time, and that bill required you to go to your doctor and get your personal belief exemption signed off on. And at the time, I just thought nothing of it because we'd had the conversation with our doctor about vaccines, and so I was, my thought was, oh, we'll get the doctor to sign off on it, no big deal. Then came 2015 and SB277, and Senator Pan introduced the bill and introduced it. And the wording at the very beginning was basically that you had to be vaccinated, or your child had to be vaccinated to be at school or at childcare. And you did not have anything other than a strict medical exemption. And there was no options for homeschooling or IEPs or independent study that were sort of exemptions. And the medical exemption, as I said, was a very strict medical exemption. And so when that came about, I was just like, oh my God, my kids aren't going to be able to go to school if this passes. And we, I was trying to think the other day of like, how did we get organized? And it really, Facebook groups is what got us organized. And, we don't use them anymore because they're very censored and they're very, it was a different world from a censorship perspective. We could get a lot out on Twitter, we could get a lot out on Facebook, and get people together and riled up and rally with them. And so the first two hearings that I went to, which were the first two policy hearings, were, I went up there were thousands of people in the Sacramento Capitol. Everybody was just like, oh my goodness, there's no way this is going to pass. There's just too many people. The legislators were saying, we've never seen this many people ever on any bill. And I remember the first hearing, before the first hearing, the night before the first hearing, it may have been 2 nights before the first hearing, they were going to show Trace Amounts, which was a movie by Eric Gladen, and he had a vaccine reaction, and he was an adult and it happened to him, and it goes through kind of his story. And it was shown in the Crest Theater in Sacramento, and this idea came from the fact that they had done this in Washington State, and they had done this in Oregon, and they had Bobby Kennedy Jr. come as a Democrat and talk to the, as a panelist afterwards, and talk, and, this won the senators over, and they didn't pass those bills. And so we thought, we're going to do the same thing in California. And I think it was one Republican senator and maybe 2 staffers came. And other than that, no other legislator or staffers came. And we were that was probably the first eye-opening piece to me of, wow, this system doesn't work how it should work. And so after the second hearing was the education hearing. And after that hearing, or in the midst of that hearing, the chair, Senator Pan, didn't have the votes. And we were all sitting on the edge of our seats and just thinking, we've won this, we've won it. He doesn't have the votes. It's going to die today, and it's done. And the chair looked at him and said, you don't have the votes today. Would you like to come back next week and just vote on it? And you can answer all our questions this week. And of course, Senator Pan, well, funny thing was, he turned to his lobbyist, the CMA, the California Medical Association lobbyist, and asked whether he should do that. And I was like, are you stupid? Of course you say yes to that. But, we all got up, and it's not that we didn't do work that week, but, he was in the building talking to these, 5, 7, I don't remember how many legislators, I think it was 7 legislators, and he won them over and he got the votes. The next week it came in, it got voted. And at that point, I realized that we as parents and as activists, grassroots, had really no idea of how that building worked. That's when I started A Voice for Choice Advocacy. I looked for a lobbyist because that's what the various people who would beat these bills across the country, or who had worked legislatively, like the National Vaccine Information Center, Bob Fisher, were just like, you need a lobbyist. And I was just like, I don't think I need a lobbyist, but okay, I get that this is the only way we do it. And so that's when I started A Voice for Choice Advocacy. Unfortunately, by the time we hired a lobbyist, the bill went to the Assembly. We did make inroads there. I mean, it only passed by 42 votes. It needed 40 votes. So it was much closer than in the Senate, but it was almost too little too late. And it passed in July 1st, 2015. And by that point, there had been some amendments. So there were amendments made that allowed children on IEPs, which are individualized education programs. So if you have your child has special needs, children who are homeschooled, children who are in independent study, those were exempt from the vaccine requirements. And so, I think it would be very different if that bill came forward today. We just have very different strategies to use. And I think we would have kept a religious exemption. I think we also may have just whittled it down to the contagious diseases. So it is for all 10 diseases that are required, vaccines are required for in school in California, which includes things like tetanus and diphtheria, which are not contagious. You get them from other ways. So July 1st, it passed, and the governor, Jerry Brown, at the time, signed it within 2-3 days, which shocked us. We thought at least, he would put a religious exemption in his signing statement, which he had done for AB 2098 a couple of years earlier. And so, it passed, and that was it. There was a referendum afterwards, attempted referendum. It didn't get enough signatures to go on the ballot. If people have watched me speak, I think that was a good thing. I don't think California would have passed the referendum and would have gotten rid of this law, and it would have looked bad. That it happened in Maine, and only I think it was 20% of people voted for it. And so, that makes it makes it look like everyone is against or is for vaccines in schools and against having a personal belief exemption, but it's more because they just don't understand the process or what it means. So in 2019, we kind of had a feeling that there was going to be a bill that, the other thing in 2015 with SB 277, the medical exemption was a very broad medical exemption. And that was a change from the beginning of the bill. It was amended to broaden the medical exemption. And the reason for that was there were parents who had testified that said, my child was severely injured by a vaccine, and there is no way I'm going to vaccinate the sibling, our other children, because it could happen to that child. And why would I knowingly give my child the same drug, basically, that ruined my child's life? And so the legislature was very specific and particular and said, family history can count. So if you have had somebody who has had a vaccine injury in your direct family, then that is a reason for a medical exemption. During 2016 to 2019, there was a group of doctors who looked at the most recent research and were using research that had been put out in the last 5 years that included genetic research, family history research on vaccines, and they were giving medical exemptions. And very few other doctors, mainstream doctors, would give medical exemptions. They refused to even see patients in their practice who were not vaccinated. And so there was a group of, I think, if I had to guess, it was probably 20, 30, 40 doctors who were writing all the medical exemptions in California because no other doctor was willing to do it. And so we knew Senator Pan's perspective on this was, they're just making money off it. They're just, writing them. They're not doing any due diligence. They are just writing these medical exemptions and making money. And that just was not the case. There was just a small group of doctors that were writing proportionately more medical exemptions, but it's because they were the only ones that were willing to do it. And they were the only ones that were looking into these genetic dispositions, and they were doing full genetic tests on these kids. I mean, it wasn't like they were just signing off on them. But Senator Pan, wanted to crack down on that. And we had seen some of those doctors already get accusations from the medical board and get letters basically saying, you can't be doing this. And so Senator Pan introduced SB 276, which was a bill that basically made the medical exemption much, much tighter and just allowed for precautions and indications for that one vaccine. So basically, if you have had a severe reaction to one vaccine, you can be exempt for that one vaccine, but you cannot be exempt for any of the other vaccines. And so to get a medical exemption in California is basically non-existent at this point. There were also other criteria in that bill, for example, that if your doctor had written a medical exemption and they became disciplined or they had ever been disciplined, that medical exemption no longer was in existence. So as I said, they were witch hunting these doctors and disciplining them. And so any medical exemptions that were written between 2016 and 2019 now were becoming void. There were also doctors that had written them that, I mean, there was one doctor that wrote a medical exemption or, a few medical exemptions who had like back in I want to say it was like 1980, 1990, an incident with the IRS and had been put on probation because they hadn't filed their taxes or they had done, they hadn't paid their taxes in some way and had some IRS issue. And because when you have any issue on a civil side of things from a legal perspective, that gets reflected in your medical or can be reflected in your medical license. And so she had been put on probation, in the 1980s, 90s for literally nothing to do with her medical care.
Wow.
And all of her medical exemptions got revoked. And so, and this was one of his goals. Interestingly, one of the interesting pieces of SB 276 is it actually has a adjoining piece of legislation, SB 714. And that happened because Senator Pan had not gone to the governor's office and had not talked about the bill, went through the entire process, got it through the assembly floor, was going to give it to the governor, and the governor came out publicly and said he did not support the bill as it was currently written. And so they then scrambled to get another bill. They got it, amended it, updated the language, and sent both SB 276 and SB 714 to the governor, and the governor, then Newsom, and now Newsom, signed it, and it went into effect in 2020. And so since 2020, one of the other things that it requires is that all medical exemptions go through a electronic system, and that the doctors, if they write more than 4 of them, all of the medical exemptions will be reviewed. Although we've done Public Record Act requests, which are similar to FOIA Act, but on the state level, and we have found that they are actually investigating they read every single medical exemption that goes through there, which they can do. Initially I thought, oh, it's only if there are 4 or 5. But it's actually any medical exemption can be reviewed by CDPH, by the California Department of Public Health. And so they are doing that. And the majority of vaccine exemptions that I have seen have been revoked. And they always revoke it a first time, because the first time the doctor doesn't have to upload any data or information behind the exemption. They're just saying it's an exemption and this is the reason why. And so I would say, I don't know the numbers exactly, but the majority of doctors get and parents get the first, when they've submitted it 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, it's revoked, and then they appeal it and they submit all the data and all the information, huge amounts of medical records, and then sometimes it's accepted, sometimes it is not. And so then we went into COVID, and the whole COVID issue came up. And we went into adult mandates. We went into, or the possibility, none of these passed, but the possibility of employer mandates, children COVID vaccine mandates in school, and, those bad bills that you talked about from 2022. I will say, I look back on it, and to me, I always look for the silver lining, and the silver lining is that we as a movement looking for health rights and wanting to keep health rights have become so much bigger and so much stronger through each of those 3. I think those are the 3 pivotal pieces in this debate in California. And I should also say, in 2016, A Voice for Choice Advocacy had a lawsuit, and there were 3 other lawsuits that tried to overturn SB 277. They were argued on different points. Our lawsuit, everyone that has read it said it was a beautifully written lawsuit. It specifically pointed to 3 aspects: so parental rights, the right to a free and public education, and bodily autonomy. And those 3 things had all been won in the Supreme Court. We got dismissed in the appeals court, and we had 3 judges. One was on our side, one was not on our side, and didn't say very much. And the third judge, we weren't sure about, and he basically, all he asked about, you have 15 minutes to plead your case, which I have learned so much about the legislative and the judicial system and how unfair. Unfair is the right word. Unfair it is to the person who is the underdog. And you get 15 minutes to argue, and he would not stop talking about polio. And our case had nothing to do with polio. And he was just like, if I let this case go through and side with you, polio will return to California schools. And, the question, if you've got 15 minutes, do you argue polio, or do you argue your argument, which is based on bodily autonomy, free and public education, and parental rights? I did send that judge a copy of Dissolving Illusions afterwards, although I'm not sure he read it, but I was just like, I'm going to educate you on polio. If you want to be educated on polio, I'll do it, but you got to read it yourself.
Which, I really appreciate the way that you educate. I remember last legislative session, I think during the summer, I was handing out the greater good to every single legislature because we were going against AB659, which is the HPV vaccine. But back really quick to what you said in regards to the 10 bad bills in 2022, I believe there was one where Senator Pan wanted to include, the COVID vaccine into the immunization schedule, which would have, I don't know what bill, 277 or 276 has that language that excludes any new vaccine coming down the pipeline. But
yes. Yeah, so SB277, the one from 2015, it stated so there are 10 diseases that vaccines are required for school in California. And number 11 is any other vaccine that is deemed appropriate by CDPH. I think it's just CDPH, yeah. And so in 2015, one of the things that came up was, well, hang on a second. You can't just let CDPH add any vaccine willy-nilly as they feel they want to. And so the legislature also put a caveat in there that if the CDPH added a vaccine, that there would be a personal belief exemption allowed for it. And so in 2020, there were two options for the COVID vaccine to be added, if it were to be added to the childhood schedule for what was required for school. One of them was that CDPH could add it, and if they did it, there had to be a personal belief exemption. So for us, that was kind of like, okay, that's a good thing. The other way was for a bill to be introduced into the legislature that added that vaccine, and when it added that vaccine, the legislature could decide whether it had a personal belief exemption or not, or a religious exemption, or whether it was just a medical exemption. And so Senator Pan introduced it to be added, that COVID vaccine would be added, and it would be added, number 11, which was all other, moved to number 12, and it was slotted in as number 11, and it would not have had any personal belief exemption or religious exemption. It would have just had the really strict medical exemption.
And thank you to A Voice for Choice Advocacy, who did fight against or oppose this bill, and to all of you who took the call to action and followed what A Voice for Choice Advocacy was putting out to combat this bill. It didn't pass through, but I do just want to point out that that bill was authored by then Senator Pan, and if you are in Sacramento, he is running for mayor. So keep an eye out. We don't talk about candidacy, but that's just an important highlight that I need to put out there.
Yes.
And in 2019, I really became aware of what was happening because my daughter has a history of seizures, and that is alarming to me. And I came face to face with the reality that no doctor was going to give us a medical exemption, nor could we ask in regards to, if getting a certain vaccine would cause her to have more seizures. So it was a really eye-opening moment for me as a mother. And as a single mother, now that I'm homeschooling, I've gotten the gist of it, but I'm not going to say that it hasn't been hard down, throughout our journey. So when I say a lot of us have been cornered to homeschool, I really mean it. And sometimes we have no other option but to adapt. And I think that's where things get a little, for me, parental rights and parents call the shots. And I think if there's a history there or a religious reason that we need something there to for our children, to protect our children. So where do we go from here? It sounded really dark and just Senator Pan kept going, but we do have hope, and that's what we want to talk about today because I'm so excited to say this. I have chills as I'm about to say this. I had to tell myself, getting ready for this interview, do not cry when you say this, but a Voice for Choice Advocacy lawyers in December filed a lawsuit to instate a religious exemption. Tell us about that, Christina, and what that can mean to families all throughout the state of California.
Yeah, I'm super, super excited about this. This was my Christmas present to California and myself was we filed it the 22nd of December. We filed a lawsuit, and I say we, our lawyers filed on behalf of 3 plaintiffs, and a Voice for Choice Advocacy is sponsoring the bill, paying the lawyers' fees. So none of these plaintiffs have to pay any of their lawyers' fees. That is something that in all the lawsuits that we have had, I have been very, very sort of ensuring of is that we're bringing these lawsuits forward because we believe that they are strong lawsuits. They have a very good chance of winning, and that these plaintiffs, that we find the best plaintiffs and that they're not put out financially, because it is an incredible financial burden to have a lawsuit, especially if you're planning on it going to the Supreme Court, which we do plan to. So we filed a lawsuit, or our lawyers filed a lawsuit for these 3 parents. It is based on religious exemptions. So the fact that these parents have not been able to put their children into school, they all currently either homeschool or have their children in independent study, and which allows for that exemption and not the requirement of being vaccinated. And they are all wanting their children to be in school, and they all have very sincere, strong religious beliefs against vaccination, and therefore cannot vaccinate their children for religious reasons. What's interesting to me, and the reason, people have said to me, well, why didn't you do this earlier? And there are 2 main reasons. I think one of them was we were looking for plaintiffs that really could speak their religious beliefs and share them in a way that was understanding to people. And one of the reasons why we can do that now is because of COVID. There were a lot of parents that had to file religious exemptions to the COVID vaccine, which was a requirement on a federal level. Employers have to allow a religious exemption to any vaccine mandates that they require. And so many, many people across the country, and a Voice for Choice Advocacy put on, workshop after workshop, helping people with how to write these medical or these religious exemptions. We never wrote them for them, but we gave them ideas of how to think about and express their religious beliefs into writing. And so that was one piece of it. The other piece of it, we did not appeal to the Supreme Court with our 2016 lawsuit. And we did that because at the time, we did not feel that the Supreme Court would have been favorable towards us, and we didn't want to set bad precedents. And so we have a different Supreme Court today, and we do feel that the Supreme Court today would see more favorably on a religious exemption and requiring a religious exemption when, in the same way as adults have it for employment, for schools to have it on a state level. And so for those 2 reasons, we were able to bring this case, or we are able to bring this case forward. And we're super excited because the plaintiffs we have, I often think about lawsuits, and you're really as strong as your plaintiffs. And the plaintiffs that we have are, really strong. One of the parents of one of the children is a youth pastor. He had a religious exemption during COVID for himself in a school, of all things. He's also a teacher in a school. And so, his child cannot go to that school, but he can go to that school with the same exemption that we're asking for. One of the other sets of parents are both ministers in a church that they founded, and then they merged with another church, and they are homeschooling their full children, but would really like them to go to school. And then the last one is a set of parents who are very religious and actually got a calling in 2004. So they've been in this longer than I have. They had heard somebody speak, or a minister speak, about their religious or about how vaccination went against their religious beliefs. And the father of this child was told from God that this was his fight and he needed to take it on. And so, those are our three plaintiffs. We feel that they're very strong. They all have different experiences, but all want their children to be in school, but vaccinations are precluded for them because of religious reasons. And so we're excited. I think the other key win was in Mississippi, where, Mississippi never had a personal belief exemption. They only had a medical exemption. They never had a religious exemption. It wasn't like California and Maine and other states where that was taken away. It was never there. And so there was a win in Mississippi last year where a pastor won the religious exemption, and Mississippi now is required to have a religious exemption at the state level. And so that also gave us sort of the impetus to file this lawsuit.
That is amazing. I hope that you know what this will mean to so many families. And on behalf of my family, I want to say thank you. Um, because like I said, I think all children deserve the right to an education, and
Yes.
regardless of personal, religious, or medical. But we know that Senator Pan has taken most of that away from us. So
Yeah.
I want to ask you, for those watching here today, what can they do to support this effort?
Yeah. Before, I just want to touch on something you said, and that is, we have three plaintiffs. If this is successful, and, we would love it to be successful, it needs to go to the first level courts. It then would be the appeal court and then the Supreme Court. We would love it to be successful on the first level. The Mississippi courts are very different to the California courts. And so, as much hope as we have, and we really feel it's a strong case. So, it should be in our favor, but if it is not, our goal is to go to the appeals court and go all the way to the Supreme Court if we need. The other thing that I will say is, if we lose, my guess is the other side will appeal it. So we'll end up going through those steps anyway. But we look at it from the perspective of, this is something, if we win, all of California wins. Every parent in California would win. It's not just these plaintiffs. It would be that there would be a religious exemption for all Californians. And just to make one thing clear, and if you're interested in this, I would say, go look at the A Voice for Choice Advocacy religious exemption workshop. But in order to have religious beliefs in the United States, you don't have to be part of a religious entity. You don't have to go to church. You don't have to go to a synagogue. You don't have to say I'm Christian. You have to have spiritual, religious, sincere religious beliefs, and you have to believe that there is a greater person or being or entity out there that is guiding your life. And you have to not just have religious beliefs on vaccination, that I'm just religious on the vaccine issue. You have to have that religious place in your life, and it has to be part of your life and part of what you believe for your children. It doesn't mean to say that the children have to have the same religious beliefs as you. So from a K through 12 perspective, it is your religious beliefs, and it doesn't even need to be your partner's or your the other parent's religious beliefs. It needs to be your religious beliefs, and you need to be able to express those, but they don't need to be the children's, and they don't need to be, with a formal religion. And so it will truly benefit, I think, the majority of people in California that are religious in some way, that believe that, tainting your blood with toxins from vaccines goes against those beliefs. But I just wanted to sort of give the overview of what this means to people, because you had mentioned that. How can people support?
I just want to say, not to interrupt you, but remember earlier in the episode, I said that I don't think there's anybody who has the knowledge of the ins and outs of California policies, the legislation process, and the legality. I mean, if you guys have not joined one of Christina's Q&As, I would encourage you to go on there, and she gives you the opportunity to ask any questions in regards to anything happening in California, and we'll give you the answer. It will give you resources. And I want to put that out there. Please join the next Q&A, because she is a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, and we're gonna sorry to interrupt you. We're gonna have one of those next week, specifically on the lawsuit, but I'm happy to answer other questions. But I'm gonna focus somewhat on the lawsuit because I know a lot of people have questions on it. But how can you support us? So as I mentioned, this is financially a significant financial expense for a voice for choice advocacy. We have amazing lawyers and they do give us a discount, but they don't do this pro bono. I personally wouldn't take on a pro bono lawyer unless I knew them really, really well. But in my perspective, you know, everybody who works should be paid their, you know, should be paid. And I feel people do better work when they're paid than when they're volunteering for us. And so I really, it's important we have a really, really good legal team. There are 2 other lawsuits that we have with the Voice for Choice Advocacy. One of them is with the same legal team that also chips away at SB277 from a titer testing perspective to allow antibody titers to be used in school instead of vaccines. And they are, you know, they're an amazing team, but they do cost money. And so my request there is, you know, if you want to support us and you have financial capability to do so, please, please, please donate to our organization. You can go to avoiceforchoiceadvocacy.org/donate or a Voice for Choice /donate. So this lawsuit is being funded by both organizations. We can have lawsuits from both organizations. And so if you do want to make a tax deductible donation, and many foundations and other organizations can't give to a 501c4, but can give to a 501c3. So you can give either way. And if you specifically want it to go to the lawsuit, you can state that when you make the donation. I will say it does prevent us from using it for anything else other than lawsuits, which has its pros and its cons. But this lawsuit is going to cost so much money that it doesn't, we'll definitely be using it towards the lawsuit. So, you know, I would say please donate. If you don't have financial resources to donate, then, you know, put us in your prayers and you know, go from there.
Thank you, Christina. And our last question to wrap up, where can we find you? Are you on Instagram, Telegram, Twitter?
Yes, so a Voice for Choice Advocacy is on all of those places. I don't think there's a social media platform that we're not on. We're on Telegram, we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I will say that what we post to those is slightly different based on the platform, but for the most part, if you join one, you'll see the key pieces. I would say Telegram is has a lot more reposts of other articles, that type of thing. If you just want sort of a cleaner look at things, then Twitter or Instagram is the place to go. We also have, I'll just mention our other projects. nontoxicschools.org is to try to get toxins out of schools and put tree canopies in and that type of thing. And then we have Stand Up California, which you're well aware of.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. It was an honor to have you here today. And we hope for the best. We're praying for the best. And thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for more to come from Stand Up California. And if you have someone in mind that you would like to see on, make sure you comment below and we will bring them on, or we will do our best to do so. Have a wonderful day, guys. And remember, nothing will change unless we stand up California.
Thank you.